So the president went on to say all he wants is Greenland and that the United States must own it. Trump says once it's under U.S. control, a new Golden Dome system would be built to defend the U.S. from long-range missile attacks. Now, President Trump has insisted his pursuit of Greenland is for national defense. We are joined now by founder and executive director of the National Security Institute, Jamil Jaffer. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me on.
So let's begin with that idea of missile defense during a possible attack. Russia's hypersonic missiles would fly over Greenland en route to the U.S. Can you assess this threat and a need for a line of defense in Greenland?
Well, yeah, look, obviously we need mid-course missile defenses in that area in order to be able to take out Russian missiles that might be taking that Arctic route over Greenland. And so the question just becomes, how does the U.S. get that kind of missile defense in place? Would it be through the existing treaty and agreement that we have with Greenland? We have an agreement for the defense of Greenland that we've had since the 1950s with Denmark. Is that enough? Can we use that authority to put those defensive systems there? And then if not, what additional authorities do we need? And does that require us to take full control of Greenland? Or is there a deal to be had here where we can negotiate something less than that with Greenland? Is the president willing to do that? Are the folks in Denmark willing to do that? That's the big question on the table.
Well, yeah, we've heard, there's the potential we could lease land or we could work with the governments there to do the same thing. But it sounds like the president is not looking for that. He just kind of doubled down on that in Davos. Let's talk about Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. That's why a lot of this talk is happening. NATO has stepped up air and sea patrols to keep an eye on Russian ships and submarines based in the Arctic. Can we get your thoughts on the desire to increase U.S. military presence beyond the Space Force base already there to help patrol the sea?
Sure, we've had that base there for a long time. The challenge, of course, is that Greenland isn't just about the territory of Greenland itself. To your point, it's all about the Arctic and the natural resources, the critical minerals, the paths through the Arctic, both for potential commerce, but also defensive purposes. It's not just Russia, it's China as well. So we have challenges all around. All of the Arctic nations are trying to figure out who's going to have more authority, more ability to operate in that domain. How can we negotiate that? Having Greenland for the United States obviously would be a strategically important effort. And here's the real truth about Greenland. It's not the first time we talked about purchasing or acquiring Greenland. We've been discussing this since the 1870s. There have been 4 different presidents who've attempted to get Greenland out of Denmark's hands and make a deal for it. This president, of course, is using more aggressive tactics. He's threatening, a potential invasion. I think that's highly unlikely to happen. But he's got the Europeans upset and concerned. And yet, at the end of the day, the real question is, as Donald Trump always says, what's the art of the deal here? Do we need control? And if we do need control, how do we get it? If we don't need control, what kind of an economic and political and military relationship can we have such that we have the basing we need, the authorities we need, and frankly, the ability to get access to the rest of the Arctic region as well?
Absolutely. You mentioned that 1950s treaty, of course, where the U.S. agreed to protect Greenland. You've mentioned that several other presidents have tried to take it over. Help people understand why that agreement, that treaty is no longer good enough. Why is owning it essential?
Well, this is a key part of the question that, I think is a matter of some debate. I think there are a lot of folks, including the Dutch, who think that the agreement is sufficient, that they're willing to offer the U.S. the ability to have a lot more troops on the island. They're willing to put more resources into it, onto Greenland, I should say. And so the question becomes, what is it that the U.S., that the President of the United States and his advisors think is critical? We haven't gotten a clear explanation of that yet from the administration. But if I were to hypothesize why that is, I think at the end of the day, it's because we want to have total sovereignty in order to do whatever we want, when we want to, at a time and place we're choosing, without the need to negotiate with Denmark over every single last detail.
Yeah, I just look at, the president is in Switzerland right now. We have a lot of European leaders opposed to this pursuit. The president now threatening to use tariffs, as we saw that impacted Wall Street yesterday pretty negatively. There's at least 8 countries looking to potentially, he's going to force this tariff deal on. How could a rift with NATO allies impact our national security?
Well, look, obviously, we need that strong transatlantic relationship. It's been the heart of the ability of the U.S. to be economically successful, politically successful, and militarily successful. But the Europeans need us just as much as we need them, if not more. And I think President Trump recognizes that and is using that to pressure the Europeans, to pressure the folks in Denmark to do a deal here on Greenland. And I think that's the real trick of this. The question is, how much pressure will it take? What does that deal look like? And are the Europeans willing to deal at all? They have put their foot down and said, no, we don't want to change the status. The agreement here is sufficient. We're not going to negotiate. President Trump doesn't like that. And as we've seen now over the last year, we saw in the first term, we're seeing even more this first year. He is willing to go to extremes to get what he wants. And the Europeans need to understand that and see Are they really willing to get into a tariff fight and otherwise? And I think the answer to that is probably in the long run, no. So the question becomes, how soon are we going to get to deal, and what does it look like?
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.